The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons.
Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Carl-Hugo Marcotte about the second edition of his book, An Atypical ASP.NET Core 6 Design Patterns Guide, some of the changes he made to the second edition, and some of his top advice for developers, regardless of where they are in their career. Long-time listeners of the show will know that this is actually his second appearance on the podcast, and it's been almost a whole year since his last appearance. Along the way, we talked about the reason for writing automated tests, some top tips for refactoring, why Carl-Hugo makes a point to read chapters of technical books that cover knowledge he already has, and why I think it's a great idea to learn outside of your domain, and he even shares some examples of why. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So Carl-Hugo, thank you ever so much for coming back onto the show. It's been a long time since you were last on. Very many months. I'm not sure of what the episode number will be, but it will be at least 25 episodes later. So, yeah. For those who don't know, Carl-Hugo was on episode 84 of the podcast when we were talking about the first edition of his book. He now has a second edition out, so you should definitely go check that out. But before we get to that, firstly, welcome to the show. And secondly, for folks who maybe missed that episode, would you mind giving us a really quick sort of introduction to yourself?
Of course, and thanks for having me a second time. And we did record the last one almost a year ago, so that is many months indeed. I started coding when I was a kid. Learned some basic, hacked together some web pages in the 90s. The web was fairly new there. Went to school, learned ASP, ASP.NET. Ended up with a bachelor degree in computer science, part-time. I worked a few years in a firm, then went freelance for about 10 years, working remote. So I'm a big fan of remote work. I wrote a book. COVID gave me that opportunity to finish the first edition of my book, and I then moved into Export Development Canada, or EDC as short, as a senior solutions architect. And now we're in a big transformation, and my official title is DevSecOps Engineer, I believe. So bringing new culture change to the enterprise. Updated the second edition of my book this winter. Well, finished this winter. And here we are now. I'm a big fan of .NET, C#. Of course, I think I forgot to say that.
Yeah.
That's me.
So, real quick, talk us through the book then. If you can give us like an elevator pitch for the book, right? Because, like I said, you've got the second edition out now. Let's talk about the book first. Just a real quick like elevator pitch, and then maybe if you can talk to us about what the changes are between the first edition and the second edition, that kind of thing. Not obviously every single. On page 7, I've changed this word to but like a brief overview so that we all know what the big differences are.
The title is An Atypical ASP.NET Core 6 Design Pattern Guide. Basically, it's a design pattern book, but It's not a cookbook. It's really more of a journey. So you can read. Well, I think the best experience is to read it from cover to cover. Then you can use it as a reference book. Basically, I try to cover hands-on and experience-based design and coding principles. So we start with architectural techniques. We introduce some unit testing. We then go into smaller design patterns, like the Gang of Four design patterns, to build components. We move up to more higher level, like how do you build an app and using layering, for example, using vertical slice architecture. We touch and revamped the microservices chapter. So what are microservices? Of course, there's many points there that also can lead to further I'm looking for my word here, but further learning. It's really that's pretty much it's pretty much Well, there's more to it, but I mean, if I have to phrase it real quick, I'd go, it's a journey.
Yeah.
How to build stuff. Like, you know how to code? How do you want to organize your code now? So.
Not a problem. Like I said, I think you've covered it perfectly there. I didn't want you to sit here and go, well, okay, so page 1 starts with, it would be no good if you sat here and read the book, right? Because then you're giving the book away for free. We don't want that. So,
it's not about the money, though, but it would be long to read 700 pages here on the show.
Yeah, it would take a while. I don't know whether you've ever listened to, because I get loads of people making fun of me for this. I'm an auditory learner, so I tend to listen to people talking about code. And there's a couple of audiobooks I've listened to where they literally read out code listings, which is great for me. But when they say public static void main parentheses args square parentheses, it's like I get it. You can just say it's a program.cs, right?
Yep.
We don't want that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. and I think I forgot to mention it, but it's like second edition as the first is an intermediate level book. So it's really, once you know how to code, as I to paraphrase myself, well, then you want to apply or learn about techniques to code better, to create more maintainable or more flexible softwares. That's what we're covering in the book.
I'll tell you something, I wish somebody had written that book when I started my career. Jeez Louise. The amount of trouble I got into, like the amount of times I would get into like architectural trouble. I'd written a whole app and then I'd get, 6-7 weeks in and I'm like, I wish I could have changed that. I get it now, looking back, why it was a bad idea to use a singleton or whatever, right? I wish, 15 years ago you'd have written the book then.
Well, thank you. And I wish, well, we're talking a bit about mentoring and stuff before the show. And I so wish a similar thing that what you said happened to me too, because you learn by trying, but by trying, it's harder, it takes more time. You never forget it though, because sometimes
absolutely,
you gotta stick there. But how just the testing. Like, I do remember not doing unit testing and no automated testing at all, and finding it to be a waste. Even at first, when I've learned that, it was like, this is a waste of time. But no, it is not. It just depends on the context. So I so wish that somebody would have explained to me, automated testing is good because, well, it helps you do refactoring. It helps if you work not alone. Working alone is easier. Like you see the whole thing. Or if the program is bigger, at some point when it's bigger, you can't have it all in your head, no matter who you are. So that's where all that automation comes into play and help. That's why I think chapter 2 is automation testing, because that's important. It's
sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, I can't speak for all developers, but I do know that there is I don't know whether it was a specific like situational thing or a time-based thing, but a lot of the developers that I sort of initially trained with, right? We spoke, like you said, we spoke before we hit record about like our backgrounds and stuff. And the people that I went to university with and did all that training with, they were very against, for similar reasons, very against testing. And they were like, nah, it is a waste of time to write these tests. And I thought, well, why do we have them then if it's a waste of time? And I fell into the crowd of it's a waste of time. And then I had to refactor something and everything broke. But I couldn't tell that it had broken until I hit run or indeed build, right? And then I was like, oh no, I've got 1,000,001 compilation errors. I don't know what to do. Whereas, with a test, I could have just hit whatever the keyboard shortcut is for running the tests. They would have told me straight away, oh, Wally, you've changed this,
Yeah, no, exactly. And one reason I believe that we can perceive testing or automated tests as a waste of time is when you start. Well, I'll take myself. I cannot put everybody in the same basket. But personally, when I started self-learn how to test, the test I was writing was really bad. So you end up spending a lot of time writing bad tests that you spend a lot of time maintaining until you kind of learn to, okay, I'm not testing the right thing. It's like writing the right feature. You need to understand the feature. And that's what testing also brings once you get it. But you have to teach that, or you have to learn it somehow. And that's where the value comes in. There's an input, there's a black box, there's an output. You test that the nin returns the out or do whatever it should do, and you don't care about the black box, which is basically the definition or the acceptance criteria of the feature you're trying, or the story, or the whatever you're implementing. Once you get it, now it starts to add value when you spend less time maintaining those crappy tests, and often you can delete a bunch of them. And you have to maintain that test suites. Sorry. And I think that's where maybe some thought of seeing tests as a waste of time maybe come from.
I can understand why some developers, again, like you, I can't speak for everyone, right? But I can understand why some developers think that, like, why should I test this code automatically when I can test it myself, by calling the code, right? The difference is how fast are you at calling that code versus how fast can I run the unit tests, right? I can, if it's well enough written, or rather automated test, right? If it's written well enough, I can, exercise the majority of a code base for an API, for instance, a web API, in about a minute, right? I don't have to, like I'm talking about a microservice here, right? But, in about a minute or less, I can exercise something like 90% of the code base just by hitting a button inside of Visual Studio, Rider, Code, whatever, right? Versus, so I've got to click here and I've got to click there, I've got to form this JSON, and then I've got to send it over the wire, and then I've got to wait, and then I've got to wait for the response. But then all I'm doing is testing the very front of it, right? I'm not testing, like you say, those opaque boxes that make up the application. And for me, for my own personal sort of development, it was when I saw unit tests as not proving that it's not proving that the code does what it says it does. It's proving that the code does what I say it does. And there's a difference there, right? That's how I think of it, right? There's a big difference between doing what the code says it does and doing what I say the code does. And I think that's similar to your. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it's similar to that idea of you get testing after you've done it for a while. You get it. You get the whole automation testing, and then there's the cost, right? If it takes me 5 minutes to test something, and I know the code rather intimately, it's going to take maybe a tester, professional tester, maybe 10, 15 minutes, because they're not as, deeply, they don't have the deep knowledge that I have of how the code works. But then you shouldn't, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's so many advantages. As you said, you were talking about like more integration tests around the APIs. And there's all the unit tests that are really good to test complex algorithm. As you said, like it can take, I don't know, a few minutes manually to start testing something, and the more feature you add, well, the more time it takes. The automation, it's there, it remains there. But on the algorithm part, let's say you're writing, well, anything. I've run a small POC to skip the context, but basically it was a thing to rename files. So you input any file name and it renames it based on a few rules. It was just a quick POC that I wrote for some reasons. And I wrote some unit tests because it's a complex air quote algorithm. Right? There's still many in that can produce different out. So testing that manually would have taken forever. But with an automation, I think it took 3 milliseconds to test 10 cases. So 10 use cases with a few edge cases, 3 milliseconds there. So every time you run the program or you want to run the test, you have 3 milliseconds. You test that. If something is broken there, you'll know instantly. And I did some refactoring in that code, but I could have done way more. But it was just a small POC to show something. But then I could have started to extract more components from there, and I would be certain that when I input the file name, my renamer would output the right file name at the end, no matter the changes I was putting into that code. So that's where it's also super useful and productive, right? Those unit testing algorithm. Unit tests that are testing nothing, or some testing your code, they cost more to maintain and are less useful. Yeah, it's
absolutely. I sometimes find that tests that are less useful, shall we say? I'm trying to be all polite, right? Tests that are less useful end up being similar to like comments. They get out of date very quickly, and like you say, they're expensive to maintain because I then, when I'm building a feature, say I've taken a branch and I'm building my feature and I don't know, but one of the unit tests is now out of date, I've then got to go and I have to then figure out what the unit test or what the test was supposed to be testing, what it was supposed to be exercising, how it's supposed to be doing it, and then fix it. And it may be in a completely unrelated piece of functionality, right? Hopefully, we never get into a position where you've checked into your main branch broken tests, right? Unless you get to a point where I've seen code bases where it was like, let's take X unit for example, right? It'd be public void test something, and it would just be assert true. That was literally the body of the code, just assert true. Yeah, we've got loads of unit tests. All you're doing is asserting true. You're checking that true is true. That's not testing anything, right?
Well, you're testing XUnit assertion library. But you don't need to. But yeah, it's yeah. That's a great subject there. Important.
I think that a lot of these things, and especially like some of the design patterns that you teach in the journey that the reader takes in both of your books here, I think that most of these things come from experience. I mean, that there's lots. I mean, let's not beat about the bush. There's loads of books about solid and design patterns and stuff like that. But like learning where they are useful is kind of I feel like it's maybe a 70-30 split on experience and book learning, right? And that's why I think, like you were saying earlier about mentors and mentees, that's why I'm a big proponent of I am looking for a mentor and I am teaching a mentee, right? I like to be in the middle of this kind of thing because then I can get some help on the stuff that I don't know, but then I can pass on information to someone else who maybe they don't know something, right? And that's why I'm always I said to someone the other day, I'm reading books outside of development, and then noticing where they are teaching the same things, but like I hate this phrase, but normal people, like non-developers, right? So, for instance, have you heard of the Marie Kondo technique, the whole tidying up thing, the life-changing experience of tidying up, or something like that, right? It's written by this Japanese lady called Marie Kondo, and she talks about how you should tidy up as you go, right? So, tidy up, you've done something on your desk. Before you leave, tidy things up, and then carry on. And it's a life-changing experience, because some people don't tidy up, whatever, right? But what she doesn't realize is she's teaching, like, the Boy Scout rule and clean architecture to non-developers. She talks about, if you're in a space where you're working and something it needs to be tidied up, do that first and then get on with your work. And that's that Boy Scout principle of tidy up a little bit, make the world a little better, make the code a little better just before you leave it, right? And things like Essentialism is a book by Greg McHugh. We'll come back to your book in a moment, I promise. Essentialism is a
that's very interesting.
It's a book by Greg McEwen that teaches similar things, but more of a business context. And it's more of a case of being able to say no to certain tasks because you need to prioritize for the work you're working on, and being able to juggle this idea of which tasks are more important, and then how do I devote this much time to this and that kind of thing. I just love reading outside of technology because it reinforces those lessons. But there you go. There's a little bit of advice for people who are listening from me, but we're not here to listen to my advice.
Well, that's very interesting, and so seriously, that's important. I think to read or to learn outside of just tech, because we're also all people that live outside of a computer. So learning about non-tech stuff is interesting, and I find it great what you were describing. That it also applied to, or it's kind of the same principle that we learn in tech that applies to real life. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with the second edition, then, I mean, obviously the subtitle of the book includes the words .NET 6 and C# 10. So everything's been upgraded to .NET 6, right? In your book, and it's using. Are you using like the global using statements and the minimal APIs and stuff like that, or are you not?
Well, we basically. There was a lot of changes. I spent 6 months working 7 days a week. Day job plus updating the book. And we rewrote everything, like the code style. We leveraged the top-level statements and minimal hosting model everywhere. We also upgraded to the nullable reference types feature. That are introduced and that were introduced in C# 8, but that are now enabled by default in the templates. I said all, but I think most code samples are rewritten. Some were not that many, and there was a reason for those. So most of the book now most of the book used that new code style that was introduced. First, I believe we talked about that in the previous show, but the minimal hosting model, which is new with .NET 6 and the top-level statements, that's amazing to get started. And I'm glad they are working and improving that more now with .NET 7 and the next versions. So yeah, there's a big revamp there. I also invested in revamping the subtitles, which might seem trivial, but trying to create a better table of content, making it to make it easier for readers to just jump back somewhere. I've learned a lot writing the first edition. I'm not a book writer. I'm a computer guy. I have teaching experience. But writing a book in English, obviously based on my accent, is not my primary language. So all of that together, I've learned a lot, and we improve a bunch of small things, small content tweaks here and there. Added some diagrams, updated some diagrams, code style. Well, that's the big thing. Then in the first edition, I inlined a lot of C# features throughout the book. I got the comment during the review, but it was too much work to maybe move it to an appendix, which we did in the second edition. So all the C# features are now packed into Appendix A. So when you read, there are some references there, but that allowed me to make the content more linear, easier to follow, because we didn't have that visual style in the book that could really show that, okay, this is just an excerpt talking about a C# feature. Then we go back. In the Appendix A, you have all the C# features, like a bunch of, not all, but a bunch of old C# features. Older than C#9. You have C#9 and .NET 5, which were introduced in the first edition. And then you have the newer C#10 and .NET 6 features that we use in the book. So all of that now concentrated in Appendix A. It probably makes it way easier for reader to just read what they want to learn, what they need. So if you know everything about C#10, maybe you don't have to go in the appendix altogether. So you can just read the content. And on the other hand, if you reach a point where you're like, what is this? Then you can go to the appendix and find it there. Or maybe just read it and learn a few tricks. I always, in books, read the chapters and the stuff that I know anyway, because I always or almost always learn a little detail. Like somebody else do stuff differently than me, and I usually pick up at least something. So it's worth reading anyway. Then what is new? If we go back to the update, there's scope namespace. We use global using directive, implicit using, minimal hosting. So these are some of the features of .NET 6. We started with a big talking about automated testing. I revamped chapter 2, automated testing, made it better. I revamped and improved chapter 3 as well, the architectural principle. So I read the comments, and I know some people struggled with the Liskov substitution principle. So I've invested time there to rework that. I tried to add some more explanation. I removed some examples too. There was a principle that had more than one example. So I removed those duplicates, some of those, and I also streamlined the example. So it's more or less the same in most of the principles. And I added the keep it simple stupid, or the KISS principle, which for some reason it was too simple. I forgot about it in the first edition. So a lot of improvement there. Streamlined chapter 4 and 5. Sorry, about MVC, Razor, and web APIs. Make it a faster read there. We also ran surveys last year to know what people was the most interested in, and both layering and microservices came up. So we have also, after the layering, invested a lot of time in the microservices chapter because people were very interested in there. Not in there, but in that. And I tried to update the chapter, improved quite a few things, did some reordering of subject, updating, adding content, talked a bit more about event-driven architecture, and I added a pattern, which is the microservice adapter pattern. Well, I call it that. There's probably other names, I don't know. But basically, it's the adapter pattern, but as a microservice. So you can do a lot of stuff with that. You can either adapt one system that is not using event-driven architecture to an event-driven architecture model, decommission an old system, replace a system by another. It's just a piece you put in the middle that plays the middle the middleman there, if you wish. So added that, and so invested a lot of time there because that's what the reader we surveyed wanted. So we've spent a lot of time improving those two areas as well, and I think that's many small changes here and there.
I think that's something that a lot of people who read books don't quite get is just the astronomical amount of effort. Right? You said earlier on you spent 7 days a week working in the evenings after work for several months to actually get this ready, and that's here come bunny quotes, just preparing it for V2.
Yeah. Oh no!
You went through.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say where you went through and refactored the book, right? I hope you had some tests, but like the amount of effort that goes into writing a book it's immense to me. I'm always really impressed. Always really impressed whenever someone writes a book.
And I say I'm the sole author of the book, but I have a team there. Like I'm not the only one who work on it. Like I had a reviewer. A new reviewer in the second edition. Great guy, really talented. I was really impressed with all the code review there. There's the editorial review. There's a bunch of other people that works with me and lots of back and forth doing, okay, I changed something. Then, hey, what do you mean there? And you're like, yeah, that was not clear at all. So you rewrite it, right? And make sure everything's clear and flows well. And so, that's why I'm saying we, because I have a team behind me to help me out.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode's show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you, and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it.
There was something that you mentioned earlier on when you said that you find it's worth reading parts of a book that cover things you already know, because there's always something that you can pick up, right? And I feel like this is something that you mentioned in the previous episode. I think we talked about how sometimes it's someone who's more junior than you can teach you something new, right? Because everybody knows different bits of the technology stack, and everyone has, as long as you have a big enough team with big enough experience between each person, you can actually go to someone and say, "Hey, right, you are the Angular person. Teach me a little bit of Angular, because I know enough to make the app work, but I broke it and I don't know why." Right? And I think going back, like you said, rereading chapters for things that you already know in other people's books, I think it's always worth reading. If you're reading a technical book, I feel like it's always worth start at the beginning, work all the way to the end, and then you can, like you say, you can cherry pick the bits. Oh, I need to remember to come back to chapter 7 because there's something in there that I get it, but I've never done it before. Whereas chapter 2 and chapter 5, totally get those. I've done that loads of times. But there's this amazing section on page 32 or whatever. I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, right? This amazing section on page 32. I'd never thought about it like that. Oh my goodness, there's this thing you can do and it's great, and I never knew you could do it. That's why I like reading technical books, even if it's for like, I read one last year that was like a web API security in Java. And I'm not a Java developer. I've never written any. Oh, okay, I have written some Java for a throwaway Android app that I started working on years ago. Yeah, right? But like, I'm reading this thing, and yes, it was focusing on Java, but it was teaching me the bits that it was reteaching me some parts that I already knew about building secure APIs. But like, until I read this book, I had no idea about constant time string comparisons. So there's I don't know whether you know about this. I'll just drop this in here for the listeners. If you have, let's say you're in a really bad world where you're sending a plain text password over the wire and you're comparing it to a plain text password in the database. You wouldn't do this, but it makes the example really simple, right? If you are doing variable time standard string equals, right? String equals or double equals will go character 1, character 2. Are they equal? Brilliant. Character 2, character 1, character string 1, character 1, string 2, character 1. Are they the same? Excellent. Move to the next character and work through the string one character at a time. And then it stops immediately when there isn't an equality, right? So let's say you're sending Jamie down the wire, but the password is James. As soon as it gets to the I in Jamie, it drops out and says, nope, that's incorrect, right? Because it doesn't match James, because there's Jamie, for people who don't know how to spell it, Jamie, James, James. So you get to the I compared to the E and you drop out straight away, you fail the comparison, right? But that's bad for security, because if you are fast enough, you can tell. If you have good enough measuring utilities and you're a malicious user, you can tell how fast that request is coming back. You can tell how much of your password is correct. And so you, like, let's say it's a 32 character password and it takes 4 milliseconds to tell you it's incorrect. Then you change that 32 characters, you change one character at the end, and it now takes 5 milliseconds. You know that you've changed something that got you further along the password comparison. And so constant time string comparison is even the very basic way of doing it is, even when the characters in the string don't match, keep going to the end, because you don't want to even give away the subtlest hint of where the comparison fails. You want to fail at the end, not partway through it. And I didn't know about that till I read this book, and now it's a brilliant thing that most people just don't think about, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's I didn't know about it personally. You just teach me that here on the show. That's awesome. I mean, the show is fun, and I enjoyed my first time too. But now I'll go out with that piece of learning. But yeah, security is something. Like, I like to follow security, at least up to some level. And when you look at people doing security and how they breach VMs or whatnot, and it's clever. It's something like There's security like me. Like I'm able to apply secure coding principle, and I know like a lot about security, but I'm not. Well, I don't consider myself a security expert, right?
Sure.
But then you look at those security experts, man, that's something else.
This is so. What I tend to say to people is, and okay, so I'm going to have to talk about criminal activity right now, just to put that to one side, just so that you can understand the metaphor I'm about to use. If I want to steal a car, right, I'm going to walk up and down the street and I'm going to look for the car that looks the easiest to steal. I'm going to look for a car that doesn't have, those locks you can put on the steering wheel. I'm going to watch people coming and going to see which ones have alarms and immobilizers. And I'm going to pick, if I just want to steal a car, I'm going to pick the car that looks the easiest to steal. Same thing with breaking into systems. I'm going to look for the one that's easiest to break into because it's low effort for me, right? But if we teach everyone who parks that car down that street to put a lock on your steering wheel and to use an alarm and an immobilizer and to park in a well-lit area, maybe to set up a dash cam or something, and GPS tracking, if everyone does that, then the net benefit is everyone's car gets to be more secure. That whole area becomes harder for crooks to steal cars from. Same thing with secure code and secure like DevSecOps, right? If everybody does it, you rise above all of the easy to pull off attacks, and it becomes more difficult for people to break into your code. And then because it's more difficult, fewer people will do it. Right? I'm not saying nobody will do it, but fewer people will do it. And I love that about security, because it's like there is no maximum secure thing for security. It's all about being just a little bit better than everyone else. Because if you're just a little bit better than everyone else, there's everyone else who gets hacked, not you. Right? We were talking before the show about writing raw SQL and why you shouldn't do it, and embed raw SQL into your code, right? And some people don't know that can be that if you've never looked at it, do a Google search now for XKCD drop tables, right? You can actually put in see if the system is just running SQL, you pass a SQL to the server through a login or whatever to tell it to drop all the tables, and it will just happily drop all the tables. Right, that's a security thing you need to patch against, but you don't have to if you're using parameterized SQL or you're using an ORM, and it's something I really enjoy. Just sort of pointing out to people, hey, you don't have to be the world's greatest security engineer. You just have to do these basic things.
No, they definitely, and that's the SQL like injection, which is like SQL injection is part of. Is, well, in 2021, that was the top 3 OWASP vulnerability. So if you don't know the OWASP top 10, that's that's the top 10 security vulnerabilities that have been cataloged throughout the years, put by OWASP, which is a security organization, non-profit.
Yeah, the Open Web Application Security Project. If you just tick off 2 or 3 of the things in that top 10, you're like 70%. You're better than 70% of all the other apps out there, right? And that's a really distressing statistic when you actually think about it, right? If you just do 2 or 3, and they're not the world's most difficult things, but they're also not entirely too trivial, right? So using an ORM or parameterizing your SQL, you're immediately out of scope of SQL injection attacks. If you're doing web stuff, putting like a content security policy on there, yeah, it might take you a day to get it working because it'll break stuff. But then again, you're above 70% of the other apps out there. It's these things that are not tiny wins, but they're doable in a week or 2 weeks of work, and you're immediately better than a huge amount of applications out there.
Exactly, and there's like on SQL, like that's as you said, an ORM, or just if you want to write your own query, like you can use just parameters. It's like just that will make your codes infinitely more secure than concatenation. And like CSP, as you were saying, you can start with slow win too. Like you don't have to do all of it at once. If you have an existing app, like of course, if you're building a new app, you can bake it in. But if you have an existing web app, you can start baking the security policies like iteratively. Like you start with more loose policies, and then you strengthen them while refactoring that whole application into a really secure one. But at least if you better have some loose security than no security at all.
Absolutely, yeah. A door which closes is way more secure than just a hole in the wall, right? Yeah. It's not as secure as a door with the world's greatest lock on it, but it is more secure. It is 100% more secure than just a big hole in your wall, right?
Exactly. Love the image there. It's perfect.
Right, and that's how you need to do. Just build slowly, just like when you build an app, build it up slowly. And I think that's where it comes back to experience and talking with mentors and stuff. Because there was something you were talking about earlier on before we hit record about being able to tell from an architecture diagram, hey, this bit of the code, what you've drawn out in this diagram, this bit here, right down at the bottom of the tree, it's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. And that's not, what I took from that conversation was not you saying, oh, I'm the best and I know everything. It's more a case of, in my experience, when I've built systems similar to this, you haven't thought about this corner case, right? When you get all the way down to this part of the code stack, which I think flies in the face of something that Robert C. Martin advises, and he advises, I think it's in Clean Architecture, he says what he wants people to do is wait until the last possible second to decide on the technology you're going to use for each component, because then otherwise the temptation is to, if you decide right at the beginning we're going to use Entity Framework and we're going to talk to SQL Server and that's how we're going to store it, right? You start the point that he makes is that you'll start programming the app specifically to use Entity Framework and SQL Server. Whereas if you left it until the last minute and went, we'll use Dapper and we'll use Postgres, right at the last minute, you're making that decision almost in real time. But then you can't do that if you have lots of different experience with different technologies, like you were saying, where you look at an architecture diagram and say, the database technology is not going to work because you want to store X data and this technology does not support storing that data in the database as it is. So we'll need to transform it on the way in and transform it on the way back out. And that's going to add lots of CPU time or whatever. And that will affect our SLAs and, our target things, right? Is that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of what you were getting at, right?
Oh, yeah, well, definitely. There's clearly that. And there's also the unknown. Like, you'll always face some unknown. But yes, experience is what you describe. Like, oh, I know that. I already saw that. So let's investigate. Or, oh, that won't work because of, like you said. And the other part is always, the unknown. Like, you'll try program something. And you design the perfect system. Then the team or the teams are starting to work on that thing, and then you hit a roadblock, right? Because you didn't know. Whether you plan for 5 minutes or you plan for 6 months, you didn't know more. Like, there's some of those things that you have to just build. And sometimes that's where iterating fast kind of help. It's like, do it or try it. Like the extreme programming spike idea. Try something, like just do it and see how it works, and then implement the feature. But
you raised a good point there about you may plan for it to take 5 minutes, it might take a couple of hours. There's a wonderful scene there's an American TV show called Malcolm in the Middle. I think it's series 3. And I use this to explain refactoring or indeed writing some new code when I'm talking to non-developers. And there's a scene where the dad comes in and he goes to turn the light on, but the bulb has blown, so he needs to replace the bulb. So then he goes to the tool shed to get a new bulb, but he opens the drawer and the drawer falls to pieces. So then he has to repair the drawer. But in order to repair the drawer, he needs to get some new screws. He doesn't have any screws, so he goes to the car to go to the hardware store to buy the new screws to fix the drawer so that he can put the light bulb into the light. But then he goes to the car and he turns the car over and it's not working. And so he looks under the car and the oil tank's leaking. And so then he goes under the oil tank and starts fixing that. And his wife walks in and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm trying to change the light bulb." That's refactoring, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, clearly. Yep. That's a good metaphor there.
That's it. I'm all about metaphors and examples, right? But that when somebody says to me, "Why is it taking this long?" Well, okay, go watch this video and then you'll understand why it's taking that long, right?
Yes, and metaphors are great to learn to teach non-tech people, like this example, or just teach tech people too. Like it's easier when you can create that mental model of the problem or the fix or the whatever you're trying to fix, and metaphors are great for that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that show though.
You should tell. It's personal opinion. It's really silly. If you like silly, daft sitcoms, it came out around, I want to say it came out around the time of Scrubs. If you've ever seen that with the people in the hospital, but yeah, it's very silly, and it started Bryan Cranston's career. You know, the guy from Breaking Bad. He was an actor before this. But it sort of got him into the limelight, you know, got people really interested in what he does. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to a version of that scene that's maybe on YouTube or something, so people can watch it and go, "Oh yeah, no, I totally get it." Because I've more than likely butchered the description of the actual scene, but I feel like it's a really good real world example of why development takes so long. Because we're messing with unknowns, right? When you know the user story you get given is written by a human talking to another human using a language that is based on vagary and not being very specific about something that they want to happen, but they don't know what it is they want to happen. And then you take that user story and convert that into a bunch of technical requirements. Oh, well, it has to have an API endpoint. The user story should not say API endpoint because that's technical. That's a technical, like a description of what you're doing. So you go away and you build an API endpoint, you build a microservice, and you build this whole system. And then they come back and say, "No, well, what I actually wanted was the button to be red. I didn't want all this complexity, right?" And that's just because, and that's not me saying that BAs are no good, because they are very, very smart people. But at the end of the day, you're working with vague descriptions of vague stuff using a language that isn't really designed to be very specific. So yeah, I feel like it happens all the time.
but yeah, well, it does, and seriously, that's something I found at the beginning of my career to be can I say that, like that was pissing me off, basically, for a lack of better English. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. But it was always like, why is our requirements always changing, right? And at some point, it became very clear. People that want softwares don't know what they want. Well, they think they do, but the only way to learn what they really want or need, actually what they need, is by trying that software. So, and at that point, I kind of, when I realized that, I felt it was way easier to work first because less frustration. But yeah, so that's also why Agile is so good. Like, you release smaller chunks of working software, whether it's every sprint or every whatever your release cadence is. But at least when the user actually tries the thing, that's where they realize, I want that button red. right? Because they see it. Like, it's hard to visualize a feature if you're a tech person. So it's even harder if you're not a tech person. So by doing smaller chunks, it helps create that actual products that your customer need. And as you said, we're all just humans trying to communicate. Communication is very hard. So, yeah.
So, speaking of communication, I know that you've started a series of blog posts for people to get started with .NET. I think the first one is called "Creating Your First .NET or C# Program." Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, like, just real quick, my personal opinion is that .NET has never been easier to get into. Right? Silly example, but Hello World is like one line of code. All right, it's two because there's a comment, but it's one line of code.
Yes. Yeah. No. Definitely. And yes, I did start a series of blog posts last year, leveraging the minimal. Well, not the minimal, but the top level statement introduced in .NET 5. So I started. It's all in the optic of you never coded before, and you want to learn coding. So that first Hello World program is quite extensive. Like, it's not to explain to you how to write Hello World. Like, you can copy paste any example. What's a program, and then dig deeper into how it executes, how it works. And I started to update the series for .NET 6. So then I used the minimal hosting model. So it's even simpler. Like, I basically deleted content because there's no more class, there's no more anything, right? It's just plain Hello World. So I deleted a lot of content from the article. And I want to do the other one too, so I can have them all up to date with .NET 6. But yeah, so you start super small. What's a program? You write one line, and then you write a few more lines in there. And then it continues. I have introduction to C# variable. What's a variable? What's a constant? Afterward, what's a comment? Like, comments, it's simple, but what's a comment? Like, all those small things for beginners. So how to read user input from a console. In the revamp, I may, since now we can write top-level statements for web app with that minimum hosting model, and it's just easier and easier. I may go to web faster than I originally anticipated. But still, reading from a console app is always good. String concatenation, string interpolation, escaping characters in a string. This one's very interesting. Okay, let me rewind a bit. I have sub-series in there. So, for example, string concatenation, interpolation, and escaping is like a sub-series about strings. And then I have a second sub-series about Boolean. So there's Boolean, algebra, and logical operators. So what's that? Like, what's an if? Or even before an if, that one is just, what's a Boolean? Like the logical tables, like true and true. Is that true or false? Then the if-else selection statements, a switch statements, and finally, that's the last one I have for now, is the Boolean algebra laws, which can be really good, this one maybe to more than just beginners. But there's all sort of Boolean algebra laws, like the absorption law, annulment law, associative law, complement. There's a bunch of them. The De Morgan's law are there, of course, and they're all written in code, not in mathematical symbols. So it's like, okay, like basically A and parenthesis A or B, close parenthesis, is always equal to A. So that's an absorption law. Like, so all those small tweaks that can help you convert large, complex Boolean conditions into easier one to read, because you can get rid of a bunch of things. And that happened to me a few times. Like, you read code, you're like, that's complicated. Then you start simplifying it and become simpler, like, or even simple sometimes, or even not useful. Like, if A equal always A, you don't need B. Like, the B is useless. So there, that's the final one. So a bunch of laws written for programmers. And if the time, but when I have time, I'd like to continue that series. I took a small break, to be honest, after finishing the second edition of my book, and now I took a good break of writing. I had my fair share for a bit, so I started updated that, and I'll go back gradually to more blogging. And of course, in Canada, I'm from Canada. It's summer here, and we have 6 months of winter, give or take, with actual snow, not like Europe snow. It's actual, well, depending on where in Europe, of course. But let's say not France level snow, or I think UK, you don't have much either.
Yeah, we get about half an inch of snow and everything stops.
Yes, exactly. But here we have feet high, multiple feet of snow. So with summer we try to enjoy the weather a bit more, and in winter, well, you stay home. There's snow everywhere. Well, or you do outside activities.
Sure. I think that's a really good point. Is that like you said, as we're recording this, it's the middle of summer, right? And I think because I mentioned earlier on, read out, learn outside of your daily domain, right? And I think your bit of advice there is way more important. Go out and enjoy the summer. Make sure you're still hydrated. Make sure you can, sunscreen and all that kind of stuff. But hey, don't spend all of your time in front of a computer, right?
Yeah, well, doing something else on computer helps. Like, I'm not saying don't have your side projects. Those helps a lot too. But just doing computer, first, you end up all broken because our bodies is not created to stay sitting the whole day, like 7 days a week, right? So we need to exercise a bit, and go outside, take some sun. And the best ideas sometimes happen when you're, I don't know, walking in the forest or whatever your thing is, doing kayak or whatnot, right? Because you clear your brain, and when you come back, you're energized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I guess remind the folks what the book's called. I'll get some links for you and put them in the show notes. That's fine. So if you're interested, and you should be interested in getting Carl-Hugo's books, you should check the show notes. But let's remind the folks what the book is called. Talk about how they can get in touch with you, and let's do that.
The title of the book is An Atypical ASP.NET Core 6 Design Patterns Guide. So that's a long name, and it's an atypical book. I'm an atypical person. I like to think that. We're all. And how to contact me can be LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a blog with an email there. You can reach me out. I do have carlhugo.ca domain. There's another email there. But yeah, you can just reach me out on social media, like LinkedIn or Twitter, and usually I answer pretty quickly, or email. I answer those too. Google my name. There's probably not that many Carl-Hugo Marcotte, so I think.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to say just before we wrap up, there's this wonderful, and I feel like I said it last time. There's a wonderful quote by you at the end of the first edition that says, don't worry if you don't know any of this stuff, because we're not born knowing it. Not knowing it is like the default state, right? Ask questions and be curious. I really like that, right? Because it's so easy, especially when you're a junior, to go, oh my goodness, I don't know this and I don't know that. How am I going to survive? I don't know what I'm going to do. Don't worry about it, right? As long as you're curious and you're reading the books and you're watching the videos or listening to the podcasts or whatever, then you'll pick it up. Don't worry. And don't be afraid of... I used to say this, right? I used to be a teacher. I used to tell the students, don't be afraid of making a mistake. Without being horrible, you're going to get it wrong. Right? Because you don't know. Do you think when you were a baby and you became a toddler, you just got up and walked? No. You stood up and then you fell over. You laughed, then you stood up and you fell over again. Then you stood up and took 1 or 2 steps and then fell over again. You're going to eventually get it right. Don't worry about getting it wrong. Don't focus on getting it wrong. Focus on when you get it right. And celebrate it. Celebrate those wins.
Oh, yeah, totally. And well, as you said, like, don't be shy to ask or say so. Like, if you don't know something, don't act as you do, or don't feel shy of asking. Like, if there's somebody that can help you, chances are somebody will, and will just make you learn that skill faster. You may still fail, but you may still fail less, right? So it is worth doing. Sometimes it's not easy, especially depending on the culture where you're at. Like, sometimes failures is seen as a failure, but failure should be seen as a way to move forward, like an opportunity for learning. I don't know who said that, but somebody said that somewhere.
It's great words to live by. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about who said it. Let's just all agree that it's great words to live by. Excellent. Well, like I said, Carl-Hugo, thank you ever so much for being on the show again. I had a blast, and I know I've learned a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to be going out and getting volume 2 of the book, because I've only got volume 1, so I want to see what's changed. And as much as I'm messing around with C# 10 and .NET 6 on a daily basis, there will be things in this book that I've not done before. So let's do this. Let's go get this book and let's get it sorted.
Great. Thanks for having me again. It was great again. And let me know, like, when you read the book, good and bad. And that's good for everyone. Like, just if there's stuff you like or stuff you don't like, just let me know. Like, send me a message and explain to me why. Like, if you just tell me, hey, I hate that, it's harder for me to understand how I can improve, right?
Is that constructive criticism? That's what we need.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That's the right word.
Awesome. Well, like I said, Carl-Hugo, it's been great catching up with you, and yeah, I'm going to go order this new book.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Hey, no worries. Thank you ever so much. That was my interview with Carl-Hugo Marcotte. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that. Or reach out via our contact page. That's at .netcore.show/contact. And as always, remember to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software.